great to be out here. It's great to have an opportunity to present to you today and talk to you a little bit more about long-term player development. I'd like to kind of frame this, my comments, and where this is going. I'm going to talk to you for about, 30, 35 minutes about this. You have a wonderful opportunity, and I think this is a great example of it in soccer, to bring together top technical people. As a few weeks ago, we brought together some of the club chief staff officers to focus on how to make the sport better, how to do what we do better. That's an opportunity that I think most sports in Canada really would only dream of, and yet you have this opportunity, and I think it's an exciting one. I think the meeting a couple of weeks ago was an exciting meeting as well. And when I was listening to Paul's opening remarks and Guy's a minute ago, I was thinking about some of the words they used, and I heard words like opportunity, I heard influence, I heard challenge. And I'd like to frame what I'm going to say for the next few minutes really in those terms. I think you have a great opportunity in soccer. You have a lot of influence. The influence, because you're the #1 participation sport in the country, goes beyond simply the development and advancement of soccer. It goes right out to the development of youth in Canada, to their physical activity, to their growth and development. And with that comes that challenge, that responsibility. And so what I want to do is I want to talk to you a little bit today about long-term athlete development, or long-term player development as you know it in soccer. Not because you don't know about it already, because I know you know it. But perhaps to give it a little bit of different context, or maybe to talk about it in a little bit different way, and to pose you those challenges, to really challenge you as representatives of this sport, to think about going beyond soccer and thinking about the influence that you have on the province, the country, youth, parents, their development, their love for sport. So I kind of wanted to frame it that way. And I wanted to get going with this particular quote. Now, this was an article that was in the Toronto Star a couple of weeks ago. Cathal Kennedy was doing an article on Aaron Winter, the new TFC coach, who, of course, is from Holland. So he opened up this way. He talked about the director of Ajax's youth academy coming to Toronto, and he identified the key fault in Canada's developmental system. Parents here want to win, Patrick Landry said, shaking his head sadly. Winning is not important. And I thought that was a great opening and a great quote. But I don't think that Kelly actually understood it the way I understood it, because where he went to from here, the next sentence he wrote after this, he said, the Dutch have always been romantics. So this is kind of his way of going, the crazy Dutch, the romantic Dutch, they don't think winning's important. That's not what I got out of this at all. I think when the Dutch invented total soccer, total football, and kind of sprang it on the world in the 1970s, they had revolutionized the sport because they created a system, a new way of playing soccer, a system of overlapping runs where defenders were playing midfield positions, midfielders were strikers, midfielders were playing as defenders. Everybody had to do everything. And it was a system that really depended on total athleticism. So total football was about total athleticism, about having the complete package. And that's what this guy came here looking for. He was looking for kids that had the complete package, or at least were developing the complete package. And what he got instead was a bunch of parents talking his ear off about their team won the Ontario Cup that year. It's irrelevant. It's irrelevant. He's looking for total athletes. He wants to build total athletes. And that's kind of what I'm going to talk to you about for the next few minutes. I'm going to talk about long-term player development, Canadian sport for life, as a context for building the total package, total athletes. So what is this thing I'm talking about? It rests on three main pillars. The first one is physical literacy. Guy mentioned that I'm a cycling coach. I had to keep a few cycling pictures in here, so excuse me for the cycling pictures. But physical literacy is the foundation. Competitive excellence, of course, we know. Active for life. So you can think of it as a kind of a cradle to grave, a kind of birth through to as far as you go, development program for every citizen. It's not just about better players, it's about better citizens, better people, healthier people, who participate in sport, physical activity, recreation their whole lives. Sport is a big part of it, it's not the only part of it. It's not a project, it's not a program. You don't have long-term player development going on over in that corner of the field or this side of the gym. You don't get it done and tick it off. What it is, it's a framework, it's a philosophy for a better sports system and a better way of delivering sport. A better way of doing sport. So really, Canadian Sport for Life and long-term player development play out across all aspects of sport organization. The technical, of course, but also the administrative, every aspect of sport administration. As Guy was saying, coach development, officials development, all those things are part of long-term player development. So here's the framework, here's the philosophy. This is what Canadian Sport for Life believes. First of all, as I mentioned, every child should be physically literate. And physical literacy is competence in basic fundamental movement skills and sport skills. 100% of the population, every child should be physically literate. Building on that, of course, is competitive sport participation and excellence. And over on the side, I've got my little arrows, first contact and awareness, which are the special stages for athletes with a disability to bring them into the sport. But you can think about that really in the context of every new person coming to a sport, that first contact with the sport that welcomes them. And then, of course, we've got activity for life. So on this foundation of physical literacy, we build this optimal development pathway, this perfect way of developing every athlete and helping them reach their potential. And you can think of that in turn, if you think about a yearly training program, an annual training program, you think about periodization as being an optimal annual training program that's progressively built in terms of challenge, skill, competitive opportunities, competitive exposures, being built week to week, month to month. Well, you can think of extending that out over a lifetime. That's long-term player development. It's lifelong, optimal athlete development. So, again, you're familiar with the stages of long-term player development. That foundation, again, physical literacy, 3 stages, active start, roughly kids birth to around 6 years old. The fundamental stage from around 6 to 9. And the learning to train stage where kids begin for the first time to participate in organized, structured sport activities. So again, if you kind of think your way through that, of course, active start, very young children, learning with their parents in municipal programs, in school programs, those basics of fundamental movement skills. Fundamentals, now they're starting to add to that, some initial exposure to sport. And then in the learning to train stage, some structured sport opportunities. This is when kids really join the local soccer club, they get going in soccer, they start to learn the game. That's the basis. Now, not everyone, but some people are going to advance from there to competitive sport for excellence. So here we have the excellence stages. Training to train, training to compete, training to win. And again, we're familiar with that idea of working your way ever higher towards higher levels of athletic performance. But the majority of the population is going to, we hope, continue on in lifelong activity. Not for excellence, but for fun, for fitness. And we know that people can leave the excellence stages at any time, and we want them to continue in lifelong activity as well. Worst case scenario is somebody who plays sport to 13, 14 years old, drops out and never plays again in any capacity for a variety of reasons. So, in a way, we want to think of long-term player development not as this linear model going from birth to excellence, but instead as a kind of a triangle or a cycle where people can move back and forth. The foundation, though, in every case is that physical literacy. And again, this theory of optimal player development, lifelong player development, is based on a number of scientific findings that have to do with human growth and development. So some of it is based sort of on empirical coaching practice, but a lot of it is based on the science of human growth and development. So here again is a familiar kind of graph that we see in the documents in long-term player development, long-term athlete development, growth and maturation of males and females. And superimposed on that is these windows of sensitive development, windows of opportunity for developing athletic skills. So you can see in both cases, males and females, that growth finds its peak. PHV is just peak height velocity. It's just kind of a fancy jargon for the growth spurt. So here's the growth spurt for boys. On average, maybe around age 13. Here's the growth spurt for girls, on average, about a year younger. But, around that, we have these windows of sensitive development. We can see that the earliest windows for both males and females is suppleness or flexibility. And again, we kind of know that intuitively, even if not as coaches. We know that little kids are flexible and that there's this ability to do things in terms of flexibility that can be developed at that age because they have this optimal period where you can work on their flexibility. We can see right after that, and this is particularly important for soccer, skills. So around ages 8 to around ages 10 to 11, we have this window of sensitive development for skill formation. I'll talk about that more in a minute. But again, that's a combination of things, both physical and mental, motor skills, cognitive abilities, and so on, right? So when we're talking about the development of soccer skills, this is an ideal time. And as it happens in soccer, this is when you've captured so many boys and girls, right? So you really have this wonderful opportunity to reach a large number of kids and develop their skills. Around peak height velocity, the growth spurt, because of the hormonal events that happen in puberty and the growth spurt, now we start to see the development of other kinds of physiological skills like stamina, which is endurance, aerobic power, and so on. We've got speed and strength, which are functions of muscular development, power, right? Things that really can't be optimally developed before the growth spurt because the body's not ready. But at the time and after the growth spurt, the body is ready. So you can think again of this as that kind of lifelong periodization, the right time to develop everything. This is the same thing, just expressed in a different way. And I know it's hard for you to see, so I'll just give you a sense of what's here on the vertical. We've got gross motor skills, agility, balance, coordination, working their way up. Here's aerobic endurance or stamina. And then up here we've got the strength and power, okay? And across the top we've got these stages of long-term player development from active start, early childhood, through to train to win, which is essentially young adulthood. So you can see this pattern, right? These are these optimal windows again, these windows of sensitive development, beginning at the youngest ages with things like gross motor skills, agility, balance, coordination, and working their way up to strength, power, and so on, right? What you also have here, and that's not expressed on the previous graph, but I want to point it out to you, is a bunch of cognitive and motor abilities. So here we've got things like memory, we've got things like mental models, abstract thinking, and finally goal setting. That refers to brain maturation. The brain is not born with all its abilities. The brain matures, and we're finding now, neuroscience is finding over the last 10 to 15 years, that the brain continues to mature right into adulthood, right into the mid-20s. So when you're looking at things like mental models, okay, when you think about a sports skill, okay, a skill is a motor skill. You have to learn to trap the ball, learn a good first touch, learn to kick the ball. Those are motor skills. But building those things together into tactical ideas, when to kick the ball to who, right? What's going on the field, that requires abstract thinking and mental models. And those things really start to reach their optimum around the learn to train, train to train. And then when you get to goal setting, it's kind of that advanced integration of all these things. To think about long-term goals. Think about your goals as a player, your goals for your career, what you need to do this year, what you need to sacrifice to get to those goals, and so on. Again, early adulthood is when the brain is kind of ready to do that. Now, there was some stuff, I think it probably hit the popular media about a couple of years ago about brain maturation again. I don't know if any of you saw this, but it showed up in in the newspapers and in magazine articles as basically why your teenager is so stupid. Anybody here have teenagers? I've got 2 teenagers. Anybody identify with? Yeah, okay. You maybe saw those articles. What it was about was it was talking about the development of a part of the brain called the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is called, the CEO of the brain, in the sense that it's a part of the brain that integrates a lot of different inputs and is used for high-level decision-making and ultimately things like goal setting, right? And the point was that the reason the teenagers often do things that appear kind of dumb to adults is that the part of the brain that the part of the brain that governs common sense, right, is not fully developed any younger than that. It starts to develop around the time that we think of as adulthood. So the story I used to illustrate this, taking my kid out to house league basketball when he was like 7 years old, I guess, right? And I'd take him out every Saturday and I'd sit in the stands and I'd watch the coaches because it was a shared gym. There'd be 4 different teams sharing this big double gym under baskets, right? So I'm watching my kids' team under their basket and the coaches got them doing, simple stuff, good stuff, layups, basic, some dribbling, some passing, right? Looking out of the corner of my eye, watching the coach over at the next basket. And he's got the kids trying to do pick and rolls. These are 7-year-olds. You can teach them that. You can teach them that complicated technical skill, but they won't understand its purpose. You can teach one kid to stand like this, and you can teach another kid to brush by him, but you can't teach them because their brain isn't ready to absorb the idea why and when they would use that in a game situation. So I'm kind of watching this going on going, that's not going to work, right? Well, that comes back to this. That comes back to this concept of timing, training to match what the body and what the brain are ready to do. And we see that so often in coaching. We see coaches trying to push kids to do things that their minds are not ready to do, but that you see the pro players doing, the best players doing. So maybe the earlier and earlier we can introduce this, the better, right? It doesn't work that way. This idea of physical literacy. Again, fundamental movement skills first, then fundamental sports skills. What's fundamental sports skills? Well, that's, again, starting to tie together these movements into the context of sport. Understanding what's the basis of sport. The basis is to cross the finish line first. The basis is to kick the ball into this net. You have to stand inside these white lines, not go outside the white lines, right? And then, of course, taking those together and bringing them into structured sport and competition. So this is the foundation for everything. And what are these fundamental movement skills? What do they look like? Well, there's a bunch of them, right? We've got locomotor skills, movement skills, running, jumping, sliding, swimming. We've got object skills, sending, receiving, dribbling, striking. You could add catching, throwing, anything to do with manipulating an object. And we've got a clicker that stopped clicking. And we've got body skills, agility, balance, coordination, rhythm. And if we haven't got those, we have to ask, well, what are we going to do? So this is the first step in what I was talking about a minute ago when I talk about building the total package, right? Developing fundamental movement and fundamental sports skills, physical literacy, depends on hitting those windows, introducing the right skills at the right times, but doing it in a variety of different environments. Snow, ice, water, jumping, throwing, kicking, running. How do you do that without multi-sport participation? Encouraging kids to participate in as wide a range of activities as possible, and having coaches in each of those activities trying to round out their skill sets to help build that total athleticism. If we don't have that, if we have kids who are encouraged to get into pee-wee hockey at age 3 and play nothing but hockey summer and winter, hockey on the ice, summer hockey camp, I'm picking on hockey, I'm talking to soccer guys because I don't want to pick on you, picking on hockey, all the way through, well, they develop highly evolved stick handling skills and skating skills, but not necessarily the rest of the skill set to achieve physical literacy. So then they come to you, soccer coach, now they're age 9 or whatever, right? They've built a narrow set of skills they haven't built the rest of the skills, and they haven't necessarily built the rest of the physical capacities, core strength, agility, any number of other physical capacities. They come to you, and in essence, they're physically illiterate. What can you do about that? What are the implications of it? We'll start with the implications. Reduced confidence, obviously. May find themselves cut from teams and then decide to drop out because they just don't feel they're good enough. Their capacity to reach their full potential in time may be compromised. They may have muscle and postural imbalances that may lead to injuries. So, physical illiteracy can result in any number of negatives. And as coaches, we have to think about, well, how are we going to deal with that? And the first way of dealing with it is understanding the possibility that it exists. So every time a kid comes to your program at each successive level, and I give the same speech to national team coaches. National team coaches get an athlete and they assume the foundation is built. More often than not, they quickly find that the foundation is faulty in a number of ways. The first step is identifying in what ways. So it's that assessment, figuring out across the total spectrum what's missing from this package, and then trying to remediate it. So you get national team athletes that are being remediated for stuff they should have developed when they were about 7 years old, but didn't. And the system allowed them all the way through to build on particular abilities that they had without considering what was missing from the package. This idea of prehabilitation, the idea of understanding and strengthening those basics all the way along to avoid the negative consequences that are going to have to lead to rehabilitation. Now here's another factor that we see a lot in sport. We tend to organize in sport around age groups, age divisions, and we make the assumption that everybody in U12 or U7 is going to be about the same, more or less, because they're about the same age. The problem is that kids can vary widely. So we base our structures on this, but in fact, kids can be 4 to 5 years apart based on their physical growth and maturation, and that has a lot of implications for our programs. Obviously, it has an implication for number 21 here. Volleyball stories are always good here. One of the early stories that we heard was, if you're familiar with the sport of volleyball, you can substitute players in and out, and they have a position called the libero, which is basically a returning position, right? It's a defensive specialist that returns balls. So when the other team's serving, you bring in your libero to do returning. And then as soon as your team's serving, you rotate them back out, right? And rotate in another player. So you're starting to get stories about kids that were specialized in this position because of their size, their skill range. They got to the CIS level, inter-university sport level, and now, physiologically, everybody caught up. Everyone was now in a different place. This player didn't know how to play at the net. They'd never played at the net. They'd never served. They were always brought in as a specialist and sent back out, right? So this is a way that maturation levels, if we don't take them into consideration and we slot players based on the way they are now, right? They're strong now, so we're going to pick them, really does a disservice to the same athlete and to our whole system later on. This is the same thing expressed a different way. Relative age effect. I could show you this graph for different sports. Tried to pick one out for soccer. It's a little bit old, 1989. World Cup, under 20 and under 17 soccer players by birth month. So here we've got August to October, November to January, February to April, May to July. Big majority of players born in the first half and especially the first quarter of the year. And by first quarter, we're talking about soccer registration year here, not calendar year. Why do you think that happened? The point is, a kid who has an advantage early on, just because they happen to be a couple of inches taller or a little bit stronger, tends to carry that advantage because they're always selected. They're selected for better teams, they get better coaching, they have more opportunities, and that reinforces and perpetuates. The problem is, the kid who was born later in the year, who matures later, may have, genetically, physiologically, a whole bunch of advantages that just haven't come to the surface yet. You've selected out kids who maybe have more potential for no good reason at all other than their birth month. So that's relative age effect. These are the 10 key factors influencing long-term athlete development or long-term player development. I'm going to talk about a couple of them. I'm not going to talk about all of them. We've already touched on some of them: growth and development, windows of trainability, mental, cognitive, emotional development. We're going to touch on some others. The first one I want to look at is the 10-year rule. It's an interesting case because this appeared in the earliest Canadian Sport for Life documents. This is a quote from the very first Canadian Sport for Life manual, which came out in 2005, I think. Scientific research has concluded it takes a minimum of 10 years and 10,000 hours for a talented athlete to reach elite levels. Now, there was an intention behind making that statement. I mean, it's true. The research does show that for elite athletes, it takes a long time, if not exactly 10 years, to reach the highest levels. But there was an unintended consequence to this that I don't think we thought about when these statements first came out, and I'm going to talk about that in a moment. It is true that top athletes do train more, and the quality of their training tends to be better. This is a study of elite athletes, defined as national team athletes, compared to other levels of athletes, looking at their training over the course of a year, and consistently, this is the same age groups, but a higher level of training in the elites. Okay, but is it any kind of training? Will all training work equally? The point we were trying to make is there's no shortcuts. It does take years of hard work to reach the top. Unfortunately, the unintended consequence was people in sport and sport organizations started to say things like, okay, if my kid needs 10,000 hours or 10 years, how am I going to compress that to make sure they have that by the time they're 12? And we started to see organizations thinking in terms of, well, okay, how do we hothouse athletes? How do we develop academies? How do we compress this? Without understanding a couple of things. First of all, what's the end point of the 10 years or 10,000 hours? The end point is elite performance. I asked Jason this question when I had the chance to give this presentation a couple of weeks ago. I said to him, well, how old were you when you had your very best year as a player? And you said, I think 29. Okay, that's the end point of the 10 years, right? It's the point of peak performance that defines this status, right? And then you kind of work backward from there. Now, by that standard, you'd say, okay, well then he could have started when he was 19. Well, no, it doesn't work quite like that. But the point is, there is no way to compress it and have the person reach this state of performance by the time they're 12. So that was an unintended consequence. So we try now to explain this a little bit more, pointing out that you can reach high performance levels sooner, but it depends on a number of factors, including the nature of the athlete, the nature of the sport, and particularly the structure of the programs that they're in. And that some of the ingredients to this are multi-sport participation to build that physical literacy, build that foundation, that prehabilitation. The idea of deliberate play, and this is a fascinating one. When you look again at the highest performing athletes, and you look at the number of hours they spend training, the number of hours they spend training structured is only a component of the total number of hours. What we consistently see is a large number of hours spent in unstructured, free participation where the athlete goes off by themselves and they just do it because they love to do it over and over and over and over and over because they're strongly motivated to perform certain skills or do certain actions, perfect something, right? And they don't necessarily always do that in the form of just shooting 1,000 balls into the top left corner. Sometimes they do it in unstructured play activities, which are still learning activities, right? So another lesson here is that the 10 years and 10,000 hours isn't always and shouldn't always be under your control. That's only a part of what they need to do. A lot of it is spontaneous and they do it by themselves. Deliberate programming is simply the idea of structuring a program in such a way that the athlete is surrounded by every possible support. Again, not possible for all athletes in every setting, but to have top coaching, this goes back to Guy's statements, top coaching, top clubs, top facilities, top equipment, right? Deliberate programming that's built around long-term player development models. And those three things together really are what makes the difference. In terms of coaching practices, there's been a lot of research, again, that's come forward in the last 10 years around different models of coaching, particularly around skill development. Joan Vickers at, I think, University of Alberta came up with something called decision training. A similar model is called a games-based approach to training. Those coaching models for skill development are all about giving the athlete what you might consider to be a puzzle environment, challenging them to solve problems on their own, giving them room to improvise and solve problems and build their skills has been shown to maximize both the degree of learning and the retention of learning compared to simply giving them drills. So this is another kind of mini revolution in coaching that's coming forward now. So we need to adopt those kinds of practices. And I think this is a good way of putting it. Practice doesn't make perfect. Perfect practice makes perfect. Right? So again, it's not so much the thousands of hours that you spend. It's the nature of the activities in those hours, the structure of the activities in those hours, whether there's spontaneous as well as structured activities in those hours. All of these things together build top skills. And again, remember, the skills development window is a little bit early on, right? We're talking about 8 to 10 or so years old kids. Think about the structure of the programs those kids are getting now. As we build programs for 8 to 10-year-olds, are we giving them that kind of support to build their skills? Are they getting the structured and the unstructured? Are they having these kind of games-based or decision training-based, or is it all drills, 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 right? Which teaches a certain kind of behavior, but not perhaps in the best way. These are some of the keys for developing better skills. And of course, parents are a huge part of supporting this, and parents have to understand their role in long-term player development as well. So this is a study by Cote from Queen's University from '99, and he created a model based on, again, surveying high-performance athletes and how they had been supported by their parents over the years. And this is what he found. He found that high-performing athletes typically had parents that fulfilled these roles, and the roles changed over time. So in the early years, the parent was a leader in allowing the child to participate in multiple sports, what he called the sampling years. Multi-sport participation, building that strong base, that physical literacy. As the child started to commit to a particular sport, they entered the specializing years, and now the parent's role changed. Now they're a facilitator. It's like, okay, how do I get my kid the best coaching? How do I help them get the right equipment? How do I help them be in the right training environment to help them develop in this sport that they have chosen and love? And finally, the parent supports the athlete as they enter what's called the investment years. So now this particular athlete is obviously committed to a certain sport, specialized in a certain sport, and now the athlete is there as a supporter. They step right back. It's like, if you need money, call me up. If you need help, I'm a shoulder to cry on. Other than that, you and the coach are doing this together, right? So this idea of changing parental roles and the parent sort of progressively step back from leader to facilitator to supporter, I think is a great way of thinking about how parents can contribute to long-term player development. It's not something that we've done so far a great job in educating, but I think it's something that we potentially are going to need to spend more time on to help parents understand how they can best support their kids. So now I kind of switch over here. We've talked a lot about athletes. I want to talk a little bit about the system building. Canadian Sport for Life and what we're doing. This is a movement. Canadian Sport for Life is the movement that sort of holds within it long-term player development, long-term athlete development. Right now we're working with well over 100 sport organizations across the country. Every national sport organization has created a long-term athlete or long-term player development plan, including, of course, soccer. Working with a number of governments, federal, provincial, municipal. Building resources. There's a lot to see online at canadiansportforlife.ca. An annual workshop has been held since 2005. It's grown to over 700 leaders every year. That was in January this year in Ottawa. Starting to branch out to work more with recreation, education, public health. Sports that have developed their plans are now modifying and introducing new programs. So there's over 80 new programs across the range of Canadian sports. PSOs are beginning to focus on implementation in their areas. And of course, from here, where we need to go is moving from the national to the provincial and then to the community level or the municipal level. So over the next 4 or 5 years, we're going to see more and more long-term athlete development, long-term player development, Canadian Sport for Life moving to the community level. That's where the mass of course, athletes and sport participation is. As I said, every organization by now has its own long-term player development plan and program. Wellness to World Cup is in the middle there, as it should be. But it's a big country and a complicated structure. So other than just to show you how complicated it is, we've got health from the community level all the way up to the federal level. We've got education. The purple is education. Beside it, we've got school sports. So you can think of OFSA here in Ontario. The blue down the middle is municipal recreation. So many facilities, of course, are controlled through municipal recreation. We've got the sport hierarchy there in red, CSA to OSA, the regions, the districts, the clubs. And then we've got multi-sport organizations and games organizations. Traditionally, we have a vertical integration in every one of those, right? You can see those vertical links. What we haven't built very well in Canada is those horizontal links, horizontal integration. So how do we get the local municipality working better with the local schools and with the local sport clubs to develop a sport program that allows kids to reach their potential? This is probably the new frontier as we try to move forward. We need to work towards a system that has more and less versus, right? So again, we want to kind of get away from the way that we viewed things to think about school and recreation and sport, PSOs and NSOs, coaches and officials, parents and coaches. And really, I think at the heart of that and all of this is competition and the role of competition. So we've got a saying, and there's actually a document that you can find online, that competition is a good servant but a poor master. Well, what does that mean? Well, basically, if you think about it, competition drives training plans. Coaches create their training programs for their athletes to meet the targets that are set by the competition structure. If you set your competition structure up so that you're going to have significant competitions every Sunday and that high performance in each and every one of those is necessary if you're going to be selected to a team or you're going to win an Ontario Cup or what have you, then you structure your training and you structure your teams in a certain way. You build teams that have to win every single week. If you've got more latitude, if the important competitions are 4 times a year and in between then you can use competitions for different purposes, you can structure in a different way. So the way we set up our competition system drives so much of what we do. And again, the organizations and the people that make up the organizations need to think about competitions in terms of different functions to meet different developmental objectives. You can use competitions for a number of different things. You can use them for skill development. You can use them for preparation. You can send out your B team to get practice. You can work on new strategies and plays. You can do all kinds of things in competitions if you're not encumbered by the need to have high performance every single week. And it's kind of making that shift towards the intentional use of competition. Being able to use competition for specific developmental goals throughout the season as well as for high performance. That's what will enable us to master competition. So that usually for sports, that implies looking at your competition structure, kind of analyzing it, figuring out what it does, what are the pressures that it creates, what do we have to do in this structure, and is that the right thing? And I know that's something that you're going to be talking about today in terms of league structures and how we can make these things work better. Irish rugby, LTAD-LTPD is not just a Canadian phenomenon. It was picked up in the UK by a number of different kinds of organizations a few years ago, and I think Irish Rugby puts it very, very well in their document. So when they talk about the fundamental stage, they talk about the player plays, the coach guides, and the game is fun. And I like that. The coach guides, the game is about fun. When they get to learn to play, now the player explores, the coach teaches, and the game becomes structured. So you can see the role of the coach moving from guide to teacher. And you can see the role of the player changing from just having fun and playing towards this exploration, right? And finally, the player focuses, the coach challenges, and the game is about performance. The learning that comes from play and exploration is what builds those strong skills. Again, too often we've started with performance, trying to get 7-year-olds to perform. They're not ready to perform until they've built the foundation. And I just think Irish Rugby's put that in a particularly good way. We're starting to work, as I mentioned a moment ago, towards building these community partnerships. Municipal Recreation, this is one of our new resources. It's still not finalized yet, but it's a resource that we've used to try to engage municipal recreation and talk about how to build better communities with Canadian Sport for Life, presenting that to the Canadian Parks and Rec Association, for example. Programs like High Five you might be familiar with, which came out of recreation but are really about building quality in sport. Working with municipal sport councils. There's about 18 sport councils across Ontario that are kind of groupings at the local level of sport clubs. And looking at some of the opportunities that come out of this for developing better programs, looking at facilities, facility access, the structure of facilities. Municipal sports strategies are fairly new, but I think a growing trend. This is Vancouver's. Vancouver's created Vancouver Sport for Life to try to pull together municipal recreation, local sport, but also schools, colleges, universities, private facilities, all under the umbrella of a single strategy for advancing sport in their area. And all this is really to try to create this paradigm shift, right? Moving from the way it used to be to the way it could be and the way it should be. So moving from an exclusion-based model where kids are cut to an inclusion-based model, from just focusing on stage or age to stage, moving from a results-based system to a values-based system, moving from an adult system to one that really focuses on the needs of juniors and youth, and again, moving from a system in which success kind of just happens to one in which it's planned, this idea of lifelong or long-term development. It's a long process. It takes time. You have to be flexible. Again, if you think about what we're trying to do as a change of framework and philosophy that guides everything as opposed to a program, you know, we do have to think about the long term. We have to identify our champions. We have to support our leaders, people that want to make this happen. We have to respect the people that are a little more skeptical or take longer. They're valuable. They're not obstacles. They're the people that give us that kind of sober second thought. But change is going to come. It's coming across the country and it's coming in every sport. You can look for partnerships, try to build on the strengths that you have and working together. I think, you know, today's meeting is a great evidence of people coming together as a group to solve some problems and create a better soccer. And again, the Canadian Sport for Life community and movement, which exists in every sport across the country, continues to be, I think, a source of ideas and resources that we can all use going forward. So I said I wanted to challenge you at the outset, and I think that there's a number of questions that I would ask in terms of how we can do this together, and here's a couple of them. We're looking at those physical literacy stages, those early stages, right? I mean, I thought of this when I was thinking of my own experience bringing my son and daughter out to soccer when they were younger. Not only do we have a mass of participants for whom we have to be concerned about their physical literacy through the structure of our programs, about how we develop them to be the total package at that early age. You know, what are the building blocks of the total package? But we also have all these kids that are kind of playing tag and hopscotch and running around over by the sidelines who could also be a part of what soccer is. Right now, they're just kind of doing what they do. Well, you know, what could we offer them? And this was a question that I posed to the chief staff people a couple of weeks ago. You know, could we offer them some kind of multilateral physical literacy building program just going on at the sidelines? Something to think about. This idea of competition review, the idea that competition systems and structures really drive our programs. Well, how is our system of play affecting development? And is it doing exactly what we want it to do? Thinking about that comment about parents here just want to win. You know, how can we show parents that winning in the long term means something different than winning in the immediate term? What's the role of our academies and some of the specialists that are starting to provide these programs for athlete development in our sport and in other sports? Can we bring them into this idea of multi-year, multilateral development so that our kids develop the total package? And then we've got Active for Life, right? I mean, yes, it is adult rec soccer, but you know, what about long-term coaching development, long-term officials development? Can we use some of our youth as mentors? Can we take some of the older kids, and I know soccer's actually a leader in doing this. I know a number of clubs that are doing this. Obviously, you do it with officials. My own son moved from being a player to an official. Some are starting to do it with coaches, right? So how can you engage the kids to participate in those kinds of activities as well? Not everybody is going to make it to the national team or the provincial team, but everybody can have a lifelong involvement in the sport, and we have to do more than just pay lip service to that by saying, yeah, it's a sport for everyone and a sport for life. We have to find those opportunities to help engage those people to become active in our sport for life and active in every sport for life. And thinking beyond that too, you know, how can we make soccer more than it is in terms of Canada as a whole, our society? I've been doing a little work over the last couple of months with an organization called Street Soccer Canada. I don't know how many of you might have, anyone heard of Street Soccer Canada? A couple of nods, yeah. So Street Soccer Canada, it's an organization that helps to deliver soccer to people experiencing homelessness to help them have really something positive in their life, not just in terms of physical activity, but in terms of normality, of being part of society again, about having those opportunities that we take for granted. And it also sends every year a team to the Homeless World Cup, which is a fantastic opportunity for the world in a way to focus on how we can make sport serve a social agenda, social good. So this is a nice description of what street soccer is, but I think the other side of it is this nice quote from Dick Howard. You know, the world's game has no boundaries, especially not poverty, because some of the greatest players in the history of the game have come from those kinds of circumstances. Well, again, I think, and I suggest to you that this is something that we all need to think about, is not just how do our programs better serve our athletes, but how do our programs better serve our communities and our society. And what would that mean to soccer, already the biggest participation sport? What would it mean if soccer became identified not just as a place that you send your 9-year-old for a couple of hours 2 times a week, but if you thought about soccer as being a leader and a force in Canada in terms of our society and the good of all our people. So I'm going to leave it there. Thanks very much for listening to me. It's been a pleasure to be out there. I'm certainly willing to answer any questions that you've got. I'm going to be around this morning. I know that there's an agenda to get on with, so I'm going to hang around for a little while if you'd like to ask me questions offline or at the side, and maybe not just ask me questions, but have a chat about any of the things that I've talked about. But again, thank you very much. Thanks, Jason, for bringing me out.